In this unit, we're going to take a look at columns in Revit architecture. I'm going to cover both architectural columns and structural columns. Before we look at actually placing columns into our model, I want to talk about the differences between these two column types, i.e. architectural columns and structural columns. So if we look up on the architecture menu and we look over to the build panel and column, and activate the little drop down, you can see there we have the choice of placing either a structural column or an architectural column. And I've got just two columns in this model at the moment. On the left is an architectural column and on the right is a structural column. Now the main difference between them is really the parameters that each contain. So if we start with the architectural column, so here are the instance parameters, so we can control the base of the column, what height that's at, and the top of the column, what level it goes up to there. That's all fairly standard. But if I go into edit type and look at the type parameters, we can see we can change the dimensions, the cross-sectional dimensions of the column. And below that there's some fairly standard Revit parameters there, some properties you may want to fill in at some point. So I'm just going to come out of there for a second. Now let's compare that with the structural column. So select our structural column. So our instance parameters are really the same or virtually the same. Again, we can control the base of it and the top. But if I hit edit type and we look at the type parameters for a structural column in Revit, we can see a lot more real-world structural properties contained here. And the purpose of having all those real-world structural properties contained within the structural column elements is so that they can be used within Revit structure to perform real-world structural calculations and structural analysis. The architectural columns predominantly are meant to be used by architects and designers in Revit architecture as almost placeholders where real-world columns need to be. So just to recap, two different column types in Revit: architectural columns, which are more simplistic and generally used by architects and designers. They can be placed where the architect thinks the columns need to be, or if the structural engineer started working out his design, then these can be superimposed on top of the structural columns. The structural columns contain more real-world structural properties and data and can be used in Revit structure to perform actual structural calculations. How both types are placed is identical. They both respond to structural grids, which we've looked at before, but that is the fundamental difference between the two types. So let's go ahead and look at placing columns into our model. We'll have a go at placing both an architectural column and a structural column, and then I'll show you how you can place structural columns onto a structural grid. So we'll start with the architectural column. Remember the architecture menu, build panel, column. Start with architectural. Just remember to check out the options bar here. Remember the options bar, this space between the ribbon and the drawing area. Just check you've got that toggle there set to height. That determines whether when you place the column it actually comes out towards you, i.e. vertically upwards out of the screen, or down into the screen if you've got it set to depth. So we want it to come out of the screen, so we're on level 0 floor plan, so the base of it's going to be at level 0 and we want to determine the height up to level 1. So I'm going to just place an architectural column. If you happen to have that set to depth, you'll get a warning message. Now I'm going to show you that now. I'm going to do it on purpose just so you're used to seeing that message and what it means. So I'm now placing a column at, or its base at level 0, but I'm now sending that column down to a lower level because I'm setting its depth. In this case, it's an uncontrolled height, so it's not to a specific level, but it's 4 meters down below level 0. So I try and place the column. I immediately get this warning here. Let's just bring that up so you can see that. Now that's telling us that we've actually placed the column, but we can't see it due to the view range settings. Now, view range is something I'll be covering later on in the course, but just for now, if you understand that the column has been placed in the model, it's just that it's gone away below this floor level, so hence we can't see it here. So let's go and place a structural column now, exactly the same. Architecture, column, structural. Again, the options bar, just remember, I will leave it on height this time, so it's going to go from level 0, which is the level we're on. These elements take their base constraint from the level, or the view is constrained to at the moment, which is level 0, and we're defining its height up to level 1. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and place a structural column. Notice those alignment lines we looked at earlier, helping you line things up. Now, a really useful property of structural columns is the ability to place them onto structural grids all in one go. So let's say, for example, we want a structural column at all these intersections here between these grid lines. With structural columns selected, I have the option to place at grids. So select that. Revit now wants me to tell it which grids I'm interested in. So I'm going to do a simple fence and pick up all these grid lines. And as soon as I let go, you can see Revit ghosts on the structural columns. It's offering me those placements. If I'm happy with that, just hit the green tick to finish, and columns are placed at all those intersections. And a really useful function of structural grids used in conjunction with structural columns is that the columns will remain automatically at the intersections if the grids move. If you do need to move a specific column off grid, just simply select it and move it where you need it to be. Architectural columns can also be placed on to the grid, so column architectural, remember to set that up to height, and they will snap to the intersections. However, notice with architectural columns you don't have that option up on the ribbon bar to place at grids to do it all in one go. You're going to have to manually select where you want those columns to be positioned. But again, once they are on the grid intersections, they will remain in sync. Notice that the structural column we just took off grid remains orphaned now. If you do need that to be a set distance away from the intersection, you would have to constrain that with dimensions. That's something I'll be showing you how to do later on in the course. Let's now take a look at controlling the height of our columns. So here are 4 structural columns I've got in my model. Just going to switch to a south elevation. So we can see our 4 columns in elevation, and I've got 4 levels in my model. If I just select one of the columns and look at its instance parameters, we can see the base level, i.e. the bottom of the column where it's starting from, is set to level 0. We can confirm that. That's where it's starting from. And its top level is set to level 1. So just like any other element in Revit that has base and top constraints, we can change these at any time. So let's send that up to level 2. The column immediately grows in height and spans now between level 0 and level 2. And we can add these offsets to the base or the top as need be, and you can put either a positive or a negative figure in there. So if you need the column to oversail level 2 by 150 mil, I'll just add 150 in there, and you can see it now increases in height. Conversely, we could put a minus sign in the front, and those offsets will obviously always be maintained, so no matter what height level 2 is at, if we adjust the height of level 2 by dragging it, this column is 150 down from whatever height that level 2 finds itself at. Just a small thing on the visibility and graphic display of columns. We haven't covered detail levels yet in the course. I'm going to be covering those in a specific unit, but I want to mention it now while we're talking about columns, because if you ever see your columns displayed just as single lines, it will be because you've got the detail level set to coarse. There's 3 levels of detail there. Coarse will display them just as single lines. This will be the same when you come to work with beams as well, but as soon as you switch to medium or fine, you see the full 3D object displayed accordingly. We've talked a lot about system families over the last few units. However, columns are an example of a component loadable family in Revit, and I'm going to show you just a little bit later in the unit how we can bring new families into our project. But if you've got a column component already in your project and you just need to create a slightly different version of it, i.e. a new type, you can do that easily, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I've got a single architectural column here. So I've got 2 tiled windows, so we can see our column in plan and also in 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and select our column. Let's say we want to create a new type with new dimensions. I just need to hit Edit Type. Remember the golden rule, edit type and then duplicate before anything else. So let's make one, for example, 800 mil square. Just going to rename it accordingly. Make it easier to identify from the drop down list. So the name of this new type is 800 by 800 mil. And now I can change its parameters in here. Enter that, and you will see that the column has now changed to its new type, which is the type we've just created, 800 by 800 mil, and the size has changed accordingly. Now if I go into the type selector, you can see the family name listed there. So the family is columns rectangular, and these are the different types. So those were the existing types we had before, and we've just created this additional type here. At some point you're going to need to bring additional column families into your project. So if I go to column, just pick structural column for now. So here in the type selector is a list of the column families that I've currently got loaded into this project, and that was based on the template I used. So you can see here I've only actually got one structural column family with one type. So if I want to bring additional structural column families in, I leave structural column still selected as a tool, and I have access then to this load family button. So I'm going to go ahead and hit load family. Now your copy of Revit should be configured to point towards the installation library that was installed when you set up Revit, and within here you've got a range of folders containing all sorts of different families that you can load in. So we've got a folder there for columns. Now those are architectural columns, and lower down in the list we've got a separate folder for structural columns. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. Within there I've got a number of subfolders for different column types. So I'm just going to have a look through some of these, and a single click on each of these will give you a thumbnail or a preview, see what the column's going to look like, and then simply hit open. Now this one's got multiple types and you can choose which types you want to bring in. Hold the Shift key down to select more than one. So I'm going to bring in those 4 different types there. Hit OK. You can see that the type selector changes to this column that we've just loaded in, and it's ready for placement. A useful property of architectural columns is their ability to automatically embed themselves into Revit walls. So I've got a section of wall there we're just looking at in plan. So if I go to architecture, column, architectural column. Now this does only work with architectural columns, doesn't work with the structural column types. So I've got a architectural column, and all I need to do is hover over the wall. For now I'll just put it over the center line and click and just deselect that there. You'll see that the column has actually embedded itself and the layers of the wall have wrapped around it. So if I hover over my cursor, you can see that you can still select the column. It's identifying itself as a column there. So if I select it, I can alter its position and the offset, and you can see that those layers wrap around the column accordingly. However, as I said, it only works with architectural columns. If you go to structural columns and put it in, yes, you can put it in the wall, but there's no automatic wrapping of the layers.
And that completes this unit. To get the most out of this training material, please take the complete course online at bimscape.com. Here you will find a complete learning management system that allows you to work through the course at your own pace. Comprehensive written tutorials provide additional information to that found in the training videos. Mark each unit as complete as you finish it and move on to the next. At any point you can return to any of the units you have previously completed to go over the material again. If you'd like to take this course online, please visit www.bimscape.com/Revit for details.